Hello, friends. Happy holidays. I'm going to try to keep this very short. I know your time is precious. We're going to talk a little bit about Jeremiah chapter 5 and then give a brief preview of chapter 6. We are still in a doom and gloom section of the book of Jeremiah, aren't we? And we will be through the end of chapter 6. The Lord declares his imminent judgment on his people in chapter 4. And in chapter 5, he tells us the reason for that impending judgment. Jeremiah condemns two types of evils in chapter 5, and I find this interesting. Two types of sins, or two types of evils. You have religious sins, religious evils, and then you have moral evils. Now give me an example, Carrie, of a religious evil. Well, take a look at verse 19. You have forsaken me and turned to the foreign gods in the land. That's a religious evil. In earlier chapters, Jeremiah likens this behavior to spiritual adultery. Israel and God were married, but Israel broke those vows and turned to other lovers. They committed spiritual adultery. They worshiped the foreign gods. That's an example of a religious evil. And then moral evils, well, he says in verse 1, you don't act justly, you don't seek truth. Then at the end of the chapter, in verse 28, you do not judge with justice the cause of the orphan to make it prosper. You do not defend the rights of the needy. As I read that passage and analyze it and think about all of chapter 5, I'm thinking that Jeremiah is indicting God's people because they neither treat God right nor treat people right. They don't honor God as he desires. They don't worship him. They're not loyal to him. They don't serve him as he desires. And neither do they treat people right. They don't look after the needs of the orphan and the needy. Well, both are important, aren't they? We might even say that both types of sins stem from the very same cause. And that cause is described, I think, in verse 11 of chapter 5. You have been utterly faithless to me, says the Lord. We entered into a covenant. We said that we would keep certain promises to one another. And God says, you broke that covenant. You have not been reliable. You have not been dependable. You have not kept your word. You have been faithless rather than being faithful to the promises and vows that you made to me. You've been faithless, and as a result of that, you don't honor me as your one and only God, and you don't treat people right. And I also think that a similar cause, they have been faithless to God, but a similar cause is found in verse 22. Do you not fear me, says the Lord? Do you not tremble before me? You don't respect me, God says. You don't give me the reverence that is due to the holy God. Well, how would we apply Jeremiah chapter 5 to our own lives? Are we guilty of religious sins? Do we honor and serve and worship God as he desires? Are we loyal to him? Or have we gone after other gods? And what about moral sins? Do we treat people right? Do we look after the needs of the orphan, those without parents? Do we care for the needy? It's important for us to treat God right and treat people right, but as is often the case, sometimes the pendulum swings from one extreme to another, doesn't it? We give attention to this, but we don't give attention to that. Oh, we need balance, don't we? To treat God right, but also treat people right. There's more I'd like to say about that, but I'm going to try to cut this short. In chapter 6, the theme of impending judgment continues. And there's some beautiful and meaningful poetry in this passage. We're going to learn about people who do not know how to blush. Verse 15. They no longer feel shame. And then there's that beautiful and probably more familiar passage in verse 16 and following. Stand at the crossroads and look and ask for the ancient paths. What might that mean? We're looking forward to our reading and our praying through Jeremiah chapter 6. Happy New Year to you. I'm going to come back to you again a few days after the New Year, so I'll see you then. God bless.